Lie down, make yourself comfortable, and I'll tell you about Ukraine. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. Ukraine is a country in Eastern and partly Central Europe. It occupies the southwestern part of the East European Plain, part of the Eastern Carpathian Mountains, and the Crimean Mountains. Ukraine borders Romania and Moldova to the southwest, Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland to the west, Belarus to the north, and Russia to the east and northeast. To the south, it is washed by the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. The total area of the country is approximately 603,700 square kilometers, making Ukraine the largest country located entirely within Europe. As of 2001, the population of Ukraine was about 48.4 million people. The main and indigenous population of the country consists of Ukrainians, who make up 77.8% of the population. Other indigenous peoples of Ukraine officially include the Crimean Tatars, Karaites, and Krimchaks. Historically, one of the largest national minorities in Ukraine was also the Ukrainian Jewish community. Modern Ukraine traces its statehood to Kyivan Rus, the medieval state ruled by the princes of the Rurik dynasty from the 9th to the 13th centuries. The national coat of arms is based on the symbol of Prince Holodomor the Great. During its peak in the 10th and 11th centuries, Kyivan Rus was one of the largest and most influential states in Europe. After the Mongol invasion, its successor became the Kingdom of Rus in the 13th and 14th centuries, which was later absorbed by the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania continued many of the traditions of Rus, granting broad autonomy to the Ruthenian lands. After the union of Lithuania and Poland in 1569, most Ukrainian territories became part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The restoration of Ukrainian statehood took place during the large Cossack uprising known as the Khmelnytsky Uprising, which began in 1648. As a result, an autonomous Cossack state was formed, known as the Hetmanate, or the Zaporozhian Host. The Hetmanate retained limited autonomy until 1764. During this period, part of its territory came under the control of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, while another part was under the protectorate of the Tsardom of Muscovy. Over time, these powers gradually absorbed the Cossack state. Eventually, Ukrainian lands were divided between the Russian Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. One of the indigenous peoples of Ukraine, the Crimean Tatars, established their own state known as the Crimean Khanate. It existed in the southern Ukrainian territories from 1441 to 1783 under the rule of the Giray dynasty. In 1783, the Crimean Khanate was annexed by the Russian Empire. During the Ukrainian Revolution of the early 20th century, several national states emerged on Ukrainian territory. These included, most notably, the Ukrainian People's Republic, which existed from 1917 to 1921, as well as the Crimean People's Republic, the Ukrainian State of 1918, the West Ukrainian People's Republic, and the Kuban People's Republic. The Ukrainian People's Republic came close to uniting all these states within a single political structure. However, as a result of a series of wars, Ukrainian territories were occupied and divided by neighboring states, including Soviet Russia, the Polish Republic, the Kingdom of Romania, and Czechoslovakia. Beginning in 1919, a Bolshevik-controlled Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic was established, initially in eastern Ukrainian territories with its capital in Kharkiv. In 1922, it became one of the founding republics of the Soviet Union. In 1934, Kyiv became the capital of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. During the Second World War, parts of western Ukraine and the Budjak region were incorporated into the republic, followed later by Transcarpathia. In 1954, Crimea was also transferred to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The modern state of Ukraine restored its independence following the collapse of the Soviet Union. Independence was proclaimed on August 24, 1991, and was confirmed by a nationwide referendum on December 1 of the same year. Ukraine is a unitary state composed of 24 regions, the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and 2 cities with special status, Kyiv, the capital and largest city, and Sevastopol. Ukraine is a parliamentary presidential republic. Legislative power is exercised by the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, which appoints the highest executive body, the Cabinet of Ministers, headed by the Prime Minister. The President of Ukraine serves as the head of state and the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. The majority of Ukraine's citizens are Christians, primarily of the Orthodox faith. Greek Catholic Christianity is also widespread in western Ukraine. The traditional religions of Ukraine's indigenous peoples include Islam, Judaism, and Karaimsm. Before the Christianization of Kyivan Rus in 988, the dominant belief system was Slavic paganism. Ukraine is an industrial and agricultural country with a strong focus on raw material production. It is one of the world's leading exporters of certain agricultural products. The national economy includes mineral extraction, selected branches of machinery manufacturing, ferrous and non-ferrous metallurgy, and other industries. Ukraine is also a major producer of electricity, and it holds significant positions in the production of military equipment and weapons. Ukraine is one of the founding members of the United Nations and a member of more than 40 international organizations, including the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the International Monetary Fund, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the World Trade Organization, and the Council of Europe. Ukraine is also a candidate for membership in the European Union. Since February 20, 2014, Ukraine has been defending itself against armed aggression by Russia, which includes the annexation of Crimea and the occupation of parts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. A new phase of the Russian-Ukrainian War began on February 24, 2022, with a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine has been known by several historical names, some of which overlap or gently echo one another. The land of modern Ukraine lies in a region that, in the early centuries of the Common Era, was often described by distant writers as Scythia and Sarmatia. These were names recorded by foreign authors, while the everyday life and identity of the people who lived there remain mostly quiet and distant in history. Over time, the lands where the Ukrainian people slowly took shape, and where a sense of continuity endured, were known by many names. Among them were Rus, Rosia, Ruthenia, Roxolania, Ukraine, Little Russia, the Zaporozhian host, and the Hetmanate. The earliest known mention of the word Rus, used as a name for a place, appears in a quiet historical record from the year 911, a treaty between Byzantium and Rus. In that distant time, the name described the land and the authority of Prince Oleg of Kiev, reaching mainly across the gentle surroundings of the city of Kiev itself. As time moved on, the name Rus slowly came to describe the lands guided by the princes of Kiev. In a narrower sense, it referred only to the calm river lands of the Middle Dnipro, including the principalities of Kiev, Chernihiv, and Pereyaslav. In a broader sense, the same name drifted across much of Eastern Europe, while lands beyond the Dnipro were sometimes softly described as Outer Rus. In the writings of Byzantium, Rus was also known by a Hellenized name, Rosia, a word shaped by another language in another time. After the quiet decline of Rus following the Mongol invasion, the name did not disappear. In the 13th and 14th centuries, it lived on for a while in the title Kingdom of Rus, carried by the Galician, Volhynian state. Later still, from 1398 to 1569, the word Rus rested within the full name of the Lithuanian state, and from 1434 to 1772, it gently remained in the name of the Ruthenian voivodeship in Galicia, within the Kingdom of Poland and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. For a long time, Muscovy did not claim the name of Rus, and did not speak of itself in those terms. Only in 1547 did Ivan IV begin to use the title Tsar and Grand Prince of all Rus. From that moment, in some records, Muscovy was no longer called only the Tsardom of Muscovy, but also the Tsardom of Russia, or simply Russia. This name became firmly settled during the reign of Peter I. After gaining control over the left bank Hetmanate and the city of Kyiv, he renamed the Tsardom of Muscovy as the Russian Empire in 1721. Before these changes, the lands of Kyiv and the lands of Moscow had not shared a single state for nearly 500 years, stretching quietly from the 13th to the 18th centuries. Later, some historians described this adoption of the name as an unwarranted taking of the name and history of Ukraine, Rus by Muscovy. Among those who held this view was the anonymous author of the early 19th century work History of the Rus. This idea was later explored in depth by Mikhailo Hrushevsky, who once wrote that we are a people whose name was taken away. To reflect this thought, he titled his greatest work History of Ukraine, Rus. Many scholars today continue to share this gentle and reflective understanding of the past. The Slavic word Ukraine is first mentioned in the Kiev Chronicle compilation according to the Hypatian Codex under the year 1187. It was used to designate the lands of the Pereyaslav Principality, which belonged to the historical core of Rus, alongside the Kiev and Chernihiv principalities. This word also appears in Rus chronicles under the years 1189, 1213, 1280, and 1282, referring to Galicia, western Volhynia, the Chelm region, and Podlakia. In Lithuanian and Polish chronicles and official documents of the 14th through 17th centuries, Ukraine in a broad sense referred to the Rus lands of Galicia, Volhynia, the Kiev region, Podylia, and Bratslav, and in a narrower sense to the territory of the Middle Dnieper region. This dual meaning of the word was preserved from the mid-17th century as well, following the emergence of the Rus state of the Zaporozhian host. During the early 1670s through the first half of the 1680s, the name Ukraine became established in the official discourse of the Zaporozhian host, the Tsardom of Muscovy, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the Moldavian Principality as a new political name. It began to denote the state that was under the authority of the hetmans of the Zaporozhian host. At the same time, this name was used synonymously to clarify and distinguish the state political entity that emerged in Eastern Europe during the Ukrainian Revolution led by Hetman Bogdan Khmelnytsky. As part of the lands of Rus were incorporated into the Tsardom of Muscovy and later into the Russian Empire, the word Ukraine became associated primarily with the Dnieper region and was also used to refer to Sloboda Ukraine. After the Tsardom of Muscovy was renamed the Russian Empire in 1721, Ukrainian lands began to be called Little Russia. In the second half of the 19th century and the early 20th century, under the influence of the national movement of the Rus intelligentsia, the name Ukraine acquired the meaning of a Rus ethnic territory, and the ethnonym Rusins was gradually replaced by Ukrainians. In 1917, a state was proclaimed that used the word Ukraine in its official name, the Ukrainian People's Republic. The etymology of the word Ukraine is not definitively known. According to the theories supported by most Ukrainian scholars, Ukraine derives from the words kraina or krai, meaning land or region, where you conveys the sense of native or one's own. Thus, Ukraina is an antonym of the word meaning foreign land. According to another theory, shaped under the influence of Polish and Russian historiography, the word means borderland or outskirts. Ukraine is located in southeastern Europe. It lies at the crossroads of Eastern and Central Europe. The country shares land borders with several neighboring states. Belarus is located to the north. Poland lies to the west. Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova are located to the southwest. Russia is located to the east. Ukraine has access to two seas. The Black Sea borders the country to the south. The Sea of Azov is located to the southeast. Ukraine also has maritime borders with Romania and Russia. The total area of Ukraine is 603,700 square kilometers. This represents about 5.7% of Europe's total area. It also represents 0.44% of the world's land surface. By size, Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe after Russia. It is the largest country located entirely within Europe. Ukraine also has an exclusive maritime economic zone. Its area is 72,658 square kilometers. The country extends more than 1,300 kilometers from west to east. It extends nearly 900 kilometers from north to south. Ukraine is located between approximately 52 and 44 degrees north latitude. It lies between 22 and 41 degrees east longitude. The northernmost point of Ukraine is the village of Hrymiak in Chernihiv region. The southernmost point is the settlement of Foros in Crimea. The westernmost point is the village of Solomonovo in Zakarpattia region. The easternmost point is the village of Rania Zoria in Luhansk region. The geographic center of Ukraine is located near the village of Marianivka in central Ukraine. According to one measurement method, the geographic center of Europe is also located in Ukraine. It is situated near the town of Rakiv in the Zakarpattia region. Ukraine has several major seaports. The largest ports on the Black Sea are Odessa, Chornomorsk, Kherson, and Sevastopol. The main ports on the Sea of Azov are Mariupol, Berdyansk, and Kerch. The total length of Ukraine's borders is nearly 7,000 kilometers. Most of this length consists of land borders. The maritime border extends for more than 1,300 kilometers. Plains dominate the relief of Ukraine, covering approximately 95% of its total area. These plains belong to the southwestern margin of the East European Plain. They include the Polish lowland, the Dnieper lowland, and the Black Sea lowland, which together occupy about 70% of Ukraine's surface, as well as the Volyn, Podylia, Dnieper, Donets, and other uplands. The average absolute elevation of the plains is approximately 175 meters above sea level. Ukraine contains the highest point of the East European Plain, Mount Berta, which rises to 515 meters above sea level. Mountain systems in Ukraine are represented by part of the Carpathian Mountains, known as the Ukrainian Carpathians, where the highest peak of the country is located, Mount Hoverla, with an elevation of 2,061 meters above sea level. Another mountain system is the Crimean Mountains, whose highest peak is Mount Roman Kosh, reaching 1,545 meters above sea level. Seismic activity in Ukraine is observed mainly in the western, southwestern, and southern regions. These areas are located near the powerful Mediterranean Alpine Trans-Asian seismic belt. Two main seismic regions are identified within Ukraine: the Carpathian region and the Crimean Black Sea region. A significant part of the country is affected by local earthquakes as well as strong deep-focus earthquakes originating from the Vrancia zone in Romania. The territory of Ukraine lies mostly within the temperate continental zone of the temperate climate belt, with increasing continentality from the northwest toward the southeast. The southern coast of Crimea forms a distinct region with a subtropical Mediterranean climate. In the Ukrainian Carpathians and the Crimean Mountains, elevation and slope exposure create vertical climatic zoning. The average annual air temperature in Ukraine ranges from approximately 11 to 13 degrees Celsius in the south to about 5 to 7 degrees Celsius in the north. The average temperature of the coldest month, January, varies from -7 to -8 degrees Celsius in the northeast to around 0 degrees Celsius in the steppe areas of Crimea and +2 to 4 degrees Celsius along the southern coast of Crimea. During the warmest month, July, average monthly temperatures range from 17 to 19 degrees Celsius in the north and northwest to 22 to 23 degrees Celsius in the southern regions, reaching about 25 degrees Celsius along the southern coast of Crimea. The lowest air temperature recorded in Ukraine was observed on January 8, 1935 in Luhansk. Due to the intrusion of Arctic air masses, temperatures dropped to -42 degrees Celsius. The main pattern in the distribution of precipitation across Ukraine is a gradual decrease from the north and northwest toward the south and southeast. The highest annual precipitation totals are recorded in the Ukrainian Carpathians, reaching up to 1,500 millimeters, and in the Crimean Mountains, where totals range from 1,000 to 1,200 millimeters. The lowest precipitation amounts occur along the Black Sea coast and in the Savash region, where annual totals range from about 300 to 450 millimeters. Across most of the country, average precipitation ranges from about 600 to 650 millimeters in the west to 400 to 450 millimeters in the south and southeast. Most precipitation falls during the warm season, except along the southern coast of Crimea. In winter, precipitation usually falls as snow across nearly the entire territory, with snow-covered depths ranging from 10 to 30 centimeters, and reaching up to 40 centimeters in mountainous areas. It is expected that over the next 50 to 100 years, the climate of Ukraine will become drier and may resemble the climate of Australia. Ukraine has a very dense network of rivers. More than 63,000 rivers and streams flow across the country, with a total length of over 206,000 kilometers. Most of these rivers drain into the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Only a small part of western Ukraine drains into the Baltic Sea basin. The most important rivers are the Dnipro, the Siversky Donets, the Southern Bug, the Dniester, and the Danube. Ukraine is also rich in lakes. There are about 20,000 lakes in total, but only a few dozen are larger than 10 square kilometers. The largest freshwater lake is Lake Svityaz, located in northern Ukraine. Many of the largest lakes are brackish limans formed near the sea, especially in southern Ukraine and near the Danube. In addition, Ukraine has built more than 1,000 reservoirs and tens of thousands of ponds. The largest reservoirs are located on the Dnipro River. The biggest limen in the country is the Dniester limen, while the saltiest is the Kyivan limen. Within Ukraine, two main types of landscapes are identified based on their physical structure: plains, which cover more than 93% of the territory, and mountains. The overall landscape pattern of the country is shaped mainly by its location in the temperate climate zone. Only the southern coast of Crimea contains elements of subtropical, Mediterranean-type landscapes. Ukraine occupies the southwestern part of the East European physical geographical region. This area shows clear latitudinal patterns in climate and natural landscapes. Ukraine also includes parts of the Carpathian and Crimean mountain regions. The plains of Ukraine are divided into four natural zones: the mixed forest zone, Paleolithic, the broadleaf forest zone, the forest steppe zone, and the steppe zone. Ukraine are currently united under the Nature Reserve Fund of Ukraine. It includes more than 8,600 protected sites, covering about 6.8% of the country's total area. For comparison, in the European Union, as of 2022, protected areas covered 26.1% of the territory. Of this, 18.6% belongs to the Pan-European Natura 2000 network, while 7.5% is protected under national programs of EU countries. By 2030, the EU plans to increase this figure to 30%. To align with EU environmental legislation, including Natura 2000, Ukraine is developing the Emerald Network. This network includes the Nature Reserve Fund and is created in accordance with the Berne Convention and the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement. The Nature Reserve Fund of Ukraine includes land and water areas with special environmental, scientific, aesthetic, and recreational value. These areas are protected to preserve natural landscapes, plant and animal diversity, and overall ecological balance. All sites in the fund are protected by Ukrainian law as part of the nation's natural heritage. Protected areas in Ukraine are divided into several types: biosphere reserves, strict nature reserves, national nature parks, regional landscape parks, nature sanctuaries, natural monuments, and protected natural sites. The highest level of protection and usually the largest areas belong to nature reserves and national nature parks. Ukraine has 5 biosphere reserves, 19 strict nature reserves, and 55 national nature parks. Ukraine is one of the world's leading countries in terms of mineral resources. Its territory includes geological structures of many different ages, formed over billions of years. Because of this, Ukraine has a wide variety of useful minerals that make up its natural resource base. Although Ukraine covers only about 0.4% of the Earth's land surface and is home to 0.8% of the world's population, its underground resources represent around 5% of the global mineral potential. In Ukraine, about 20,000 deposits and occurrences of more than 100 types of minerals have been explored. Many of these deposits are important for industry and are officially registered by the state. The most economically important resources include coal, oil and natural gas, iron and manganese ores, sulfur, rock salt, potassium salts, construction materials, and mineral waters. These resources are found in different geological regions across the country. By explored reserves of certain minerals, Ukraine has historically ranked ahead of several major countries. In particular, by the late 20th century, Ukraine held a leading position in Europe and the world in iron, manganese, and titanium-related ores, as well as in many types of non-metallic raw materials. Ukraine has a wide variety of natural conditions. It lies in several natural zones and has access to 2 seas. Because of this, the country has rich biodiversity. Many unique species are found especially in the Carpathian Mountains and the Crimean Mountains. More than 60,000 species of living organisms are recorded in Ukraine. These include fungi and lichens, algae, mosses, plants, insects, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Insects make up the largest group. Birds and mammals are also well represented across different regions. Natural vegetation covers about 30% of Ukraine's territory. Much of it has been changed by human activity. Forests cover around 14% of the country, which is much lower than the European average. Meadows occupy about 9% and are mostly used for grazing and haymaking. Natural steppe areas once covered large parts of Ukraine, but today less than 1% remains, mostly in protected areas. Wetlands, floodplains, and salt flats occupy only small areas. Ukraine has many endemic species, meaning they exist only in this region. Most endemic species are plants and invertebrates. Among vertebrates, there are only a few endemic animals, mainly found in steppe and mountain regions. Many species entered Ukraine because of human activity. Some were introduced on purpose, such as certain game animals. Others arrived unintentionally or spread due to climate change. Some invasive species cause serious damage to agriculture and natural ecosystems and can replace native species. Over the last few centuries, many animal species disappeared from Ukraine because of habitat destruction and hunting. One well-known example is the Saiga antelope, which became extinct in Ukraine in the 19th century. Several other species also vanished completely. The European bison disappeared earlier but was successfully reintroduced in the 20th century. The main document protecting biodiversity in Ukraine is the Red Book of Ukraine. It lists rare, vulnerable, and endangered plant and animal species. These species are protected by law across the entire country, including marine areas. As of recent years, the Red Book includes more than 1,500 species. Scientific research and conservation management are carried out by national institutions and government bodies. Prehistoric period. From the Paleolithic to the Bronze Age. The territory of modern Ukraine has been inhabited by humans for a very long time. One of the oldest known human sites in Europe is located near the village of Korolevo in western Ukraine. It dates to about 1.4 million years ago and is linked to early human migration from the Caucasus. From around 300,000 years ago, Neanderthals lived across much of present-day Ukraine. Their sites are especially well known in Crimea. Crimea was likely one of the last regions where Neanderthals survived until about 28,000 years ago. Around 40,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans arrived in several waves. They came from the Middle East and lived as hunter-gatherers. For several thousand years, modern humans and Neanderthals coexisted. Over time, Neanderthals disappeared and were partly absorbed into the modern population. The earliest modern humans in this region are linked to the Aurignacian culture. Later they were replaced by Gravettian and Epigravettian cultures. These groups remained hunter-gatherers until about 8,000 years ago. Genetic research shows they are among the ancestors of modern Europeans, including Ukrainians. After the last ice age ended about 11,000 years ago, the climate became warmer. This allowed populations to grow and farming to begin. Around 9,000 years ago, early farmers migrated from Anatolia into Europe. This marked the beginning of the Neolithic period. On the territory of Ukraine, this process led to the rise of the Trypillia culture. It existed from the 6th to the 3rd millennium BCE. Trypillia people practiced farming and lived in large settlements. Genetic studies show they had a strong influence on later European populations. At the same time, the Dniprodonetsk culture existed in the region. It developed from local hunter-gatherers. Over time, these communities also adopted farming and animal husbandry. About 5,000 years ago, a major migration came from the steppe regions. These were pastoral nomads known as the Yamnaya culture. They spread across Eastern Europe and beyond. They absorbed local populations, including the Trypillia culture. This migration had a major impact on the genetic makeup of Europeans. Modern genetic research shows 3 key population layers in Europe. These are early hunter-gatherers, early farmers from Anatolia, and steppe pastoralists of the Yamnaya culture. Later migrations had a smaller overall genetic impact. Many later steppe cultures were closely related to the Yamnaya people. These include groups such as the Cimmerian Scythians and Sarmatians. Over time, European populations developed mainly from existing genetic material. This process included large movements within the continent rather than new external waves. Iron Age, Antiquity, and the early Middle Ages. The first people on the territory of modern Ukraine known by a historical name were the Cimmerians. They lived here roughly from the 10th to the 7th century BCE. They descended from earlier steppe cultures. A related group called the Taurians lived in southern Crimea during the 1st millennium BCE. Later, the Cimmerians were replaced by the Scythians. From the 7th to the 3rd century BCE, the Scythians created a powerful steppe state. In the 3rd century BCE, they were replaced by the Sarmatians. The Sarmatians were a group of related tribes that ruled until the 4th century CE. They were eventually displaced by the Huns. This movement helped trigger the Great Migration period in Europe. At the same time, ancient Greeks founded cities along the northern coast of the Black Sea. This began in the 7th century BCE. These cities included Albia, Chersonesus, and Panticapaeum. They became important centers of trade and culture. In the 5th century BCE, they formed the Bosporan Kingdom. By the 1st century BCE, this kingdom became part of the Roman world. Around the beginning of the Common Era, the early Slavs appeared in Eastern Europe. They likely emerged between the Vistula and Dnipro rivers. Their early history is difficult to trace because cremation was common. This limits genetic evidence from this period. The origins of the Slavs are often linked to the Zarabintsy culture. Nearby cultures such as the Przeworsk culture also played a role. Roman authors of the 1st century CE mention a people called the Veneti. These are usually connected with early Slavs but not with certainty. Several cultures in this region show mixed influences. Some included Baltic groups and Germanic Goths. The Chernihiv culture shows strong Gothic elements. Clear Slavic identity is most confidently linked to later cultures. The Pankivka and Prague-Korchak cultures from the 5th to 7th centuries are widely seen as Slavic. They are associated with groups known as the Ontes and the Sklavini. Byzantine sources describe these groups and name early Slavic leaders. They often clashed with Goths Avars in the Byzantine Empire. From these groups the wider Slavic expansion across Europe likely began. By the 6th century distinct Slavic tribes had formed. By the early 9th century they occupied most of today's Ukraine. These included the Polians, Drevlians, and Severians. At the same time the southern steppes were controlled by Turkic nomads. These included Bulgars, Khazars, Pecheneg, and later Cumans. In southern Crimea Greek Gothic and Alan communities remained. Former Greek cities along the coast were under Byzantine control. This control was often challenged by steppe nomadic raids. The Middle Ages. Kyivan Rus. From the 9th century the lands of modern Ukraine became the center of the state known as Rus. Its capital was Kyiv. In 882 Kyiv was taken by Prince Oleg. He declared it the main city of Rus and established the rule of the Rurikid dynasty. Under Princess Olga, Prince Sviatoslav, Prince Volodymyr, and Prince Yaroslav the Wise, the state expanded. Kyiv brought many neighboring Slavic, Baltic, and Finno-Ugric tribes under its control. At its height Rus was the largest state in Europe. Its territory reached about 1.5 million square kilometers. The borders of Kyivan Rus stretched far in all directions. They reached the Baltic Sea in the north. They extended to the Carpathian region in the west. They touched the steppe zones in the south. They reached the Volga region in the east. For a time Rus also controlled distant outposts in the steppe and near the Kerch Strait. Rus had close and complex relations with the Byzantine Empire. This was due to an important trade route between Kyiv and Constantinople. It was known as the route from the Varangians to the Greeks. In the early 10th century Prince Oleg led a campaign against Constantinople. Later a trade agreement was signed. In 957 Princess Olga visited Constantinople and accepted Christianity. Her son Sviatoslav kept the traditional Slavic beliefs. His son Prince Volodymyr sought an alliance with Byzantium. In 988 Volodymyr accepted Christianity. This event is known as the Christianization of Rus. After this Kyiv became a major Christian center. The first stone church was built there soon after. In the early 11th century, St. Sophia Cathedral was founded in Kyiv. It is one of the oldest preserved buildings in Eastern Europe. Kyivan Rus was not a single centralized state. It consisted of several major principalities. They had broad autonomy and often competed with each other. Conflicts were especially common over the Kyivan throne. The core lands were Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Pereyaslav. Other important centers included Novgorod, Volhynia, and Galicia. From the 11th to the 13th century, political fragmentation increased. This weakened the state. In 1169, Kyiv was sacked by princes from the northeast. This further reduced its influence. In the early 13th century, the Mongol Empire emerged. In 1223, Rus princes were defeated at the Battle of the Kalkar River. This opened the way for a large-scale invasion. In 1240, Mongol forces captured and destroyed Kyiv. This marked the end of Kyivan Rus as a unified state. Most Rus principalities became dependent on the Mongol horde. Galicia, Volhynia state. After the decline of Kyivan Rus, the political, economic, and cultural center of the Ukrainian lands shifted westward to the Galicia, Volhynia state. This state included Volhynia, Galicia, and several neighboring regions, making it one of the most important successors of Rus. In Galicia, local principalities appeared in the late 11th century. In 1141, Prince Holodomor united them into the Galician Principality, which reached its peak under Prince Yaroslav Osmomysl. In 1199, Roman the Great united Galicia and Volhynia into a single state, forming the Galicia-Volhynia Principality. Roman's son, Daniel of Galicia, ruled during the time of the Mongol invasions. He formally recognized the authority of the Golden Horde but sought support from Western Europe to regain independence. Daniel formed alliances with Poland, Hungary, and other Western powers. In 1253, he was crowned King of Rus by the Pope, becoming the only medieval ruler of Rus to receive a royal crown. Around 1256, after victories against Mongol forces, Daniel founded the city of Lviv, later named after his son Leviticus. However, due to a lack of real military support from the West, Daniel again acknowledged Mongol supremacy in 1259. His successors continued to balance between resistance and cooperation with the Golden Horde. In 1303, a separate Galician Orthodox Metropolitanate was established, strengthening the region's religious independence. Later rulers attempted renewed resistance but with limited success. In 1340, the death of the last ruler, Uri II, triggered a struggle between neighboring powers for control of the state. By the end of the 14th century, Galicia became part of the Kingdom of Poland, while Volhynia joined the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. At the same time, southern Ukrainian lands remained under the Golden Horde, and Transcarpathia was controlled by the Kingdom of Hungary. The Galicia-Volhynia state played a key role in preserving the political traditions of Rus and maintaining continuity in Ukrainian history during a period of major upheaval. Crimea in the 13th to 15th centuries. In 1223, Mongol Tatar forces entered Crimea. By 1242, they had defeated the Cumans and taken control of the former Byzantine cities. the peninsula came under the authority of the Golden Horde, and a special administrative unit, the Crimean Ulus, was formed, with its capital in Socat, today known as Sterei-Krym. In 1266, the Italian Republic of Genoa received permission from the Golden Horde to establish a trading colony in Kaffa, modern Feodosia. Over time, the Genoese expanded their control along the entire southern coast of Crimea and the eastern part of the Kerch Peninsula. This network of colonies became known as Genoese Gazaria, with Kaffa as its main center. Genoese rule in Crimea lasted for more than 2 centuries. Local Byzantine elites, mainly Greeks and Goths who followed Eastern Orthodox Christianity, were dissatisfied with both Mongol Muslim rule and, even more so, with the Catholic Genoese. In the early 14th century, they established an independent mountain state known as the Principality of Theodoro, with its capital at the fortress city of Doros, Mangop. The Principality of Theodoro had limited access to the sea, mainly through the fortress of Kalamita and the port of Avlida, today's Inkerman. It maintained diplomatic relations with the Golden Horde but frequently fought the Genoese for control of the southern Crimean coast. In 1441, the Golden Horde collapsed, leading to the emergence of the Crimean Khanate as an independent state in Crimea and the northern Black Sea steppes. In 1475, the Ottoman Empire invaded Crimea. Ottoman forces destroyed both the Principality of Theodoro and the Genoese colonies. Although the Crimean Khans resisted militarily, in 1478 they recognized Ottoman overlordship. From that point on, the southern coast of Crimea was directly controlled by the Ottoman Empire until the 18th century, while the Crimean Khanate remained an Ottoman vassal state. This period shaped Crimea as a crossroads of empires, trade routes, and cultures in the Black Sea region. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the Kingdom of Poland, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the Kyiv Voivodeship. In the 14th century, Lithuanian rulers from the Gedimina dynasty took advantage of the decline of the Golden Horde. They began to unite and redistribute the former lands of Rus, which had been devastated by the Mongol invasion in the mid-13th century. As a result, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania quickly expanded. By 1341, Slavic, Ruthenian lands already outnumbered ethnic Lithuanian lands by about 2.5 to 1. By 1430, this ratio had grown to 12 to 1. The process began under Grand Duke Gediminas, who took control of Kyiv in 1322 after a victory near the Irpin River. In 1340, Prince Lubert annexed Volhynia. Most Ukrainian lands were incorporated during the reign of Algirdas, who added the Chernihiv-Severian, Podilian, and Kyiv regions in the mid-14th century. These lands were gained not only through warfare, but also through peaceful means such as agreements, marriages, and dynastic alliances, which were often more common than conquest. From 1398, the state was officially called the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Ruthenia, and Samogitia. Although ruled by Lithuanian dynasties, Ruthenian, mainly Ukrainian, noble families played a major role in politics and the military. In fact, Ruthenian nobles were more numerous than Lithuanian ones, and many soldiers and commanders in the army came from Ruthenian lands. Ruthenian warriors were also influential in the army of the Kingdom of Poland, which from 1392 controlled Galicia and other western Ukrainian territories. For example, at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410, Polish and Lithuanian forces defeated the Teutonic Order. Among those rewarded for bravery was a Ruthenian knight, Ivanko Sushik, from near modern-day Lviv. Two of the most powerful Ruthenian noble families were the Ostrogsky and Vishnevetsky families from Volhynia. Prince Konstanty Ostrogsky was one of the most successful military leaders of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. He became its first Grand Hetman after defeating Tatar forces near Ochakiv in 1497. In 1514, he led a Lithuanian-Ruthenian army to victory over Moscow's forces at the Battle of Orsha, slowing Moscow's expansion into former Rus lands. It was within the Grand Duchy of Lithuania that Ukrainian Cossacks first began to form, influenced in part by Lithuanian military traditions. At first, Cossack groups emerged spontaneously, mainly to defend frontier regions from nomadic raids, rather than as a planned state institution. Their growing numbers and raids against the Crimean Khanate caused ongoing tension with both Lithuanian rulers and the Khan. In 1556, Prince Dmytro Vishnevetsky built a fortress on the island of Malokortitsia, which later became a foundation for the first Cossack strongholds. In 1569, Lithuania and Poland united to form the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. At that time, many Ruthenian noble families retained their influence. In 1576, Prince Konstanty Vasil Ostrogsky, with the support of his niece Princess Halshka Ostrowska, founded the Ostro Academy, the first institution of higher education in Ukrainian history. This period was crucial in shaping Ukraine's political elites, military traditions, and cultural development within Central and Eastern Europe. Cossack era. In the 15th century, communities known as Cossacks appeared in the Middle Dnieper region, on the southeastern frontier of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. These groups formed to defend the borderlands of the so-called wild fields from raids by steppe nomads. From the 16th century, their main military center became the Zaporizhian Sich. The Cossacks of the Zaporizhian host gradually became a distinct social group. They fought as allies of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in several major wars of the late 16th and early 17th centuries. At the same time, they carried out independent military raids against neighboring regions, including Crimea and the Black Sea coast, and often served as mercenaries during large European conflicts, such as the 30 Years' War. One of the most successful Cossack leaders of this period was Petro Konashevich Sahedakny. Because of legal, social, and religious pressure from the Polish nobility, the Cossacks repeatedly rebelled. These uprisings aimed not only to defend Cossack rights but also to protect the Orthodox Ukrainian population from discrimination within the Commonwealth. Alongside military activity, education and culture developed. In Kyiv, a brotherhood school founded in 1615 later became the Kyiv Mohyla Academy, the leading educational center in Ukraine during the 17th and 18th centuries. Many Cossack leaders were educated there. A major turning point came in 1648, when the Cossacks, led by Bogdan Khmelnytsky, launched a large uprising against Polish rule. This struggle led to the creation of a semi-independent Cossack state in central Ukraine, commonly known as the Hetmanate. To continue the war, the Cossack state accepted the protection of the Moscow Tsar in 1654. This decision later led to conflict with Moscow and internal divisions. After years of civil war, known as the Ruin, Ukraine was split along the Dnieper River. The western part returned to Polish control, while the eastern part came under growing influence from Moscow. This division was formally confirmed in 1667. Later attempts to reunite Ukraine, including efforts by Hetman Petro Doroshenko with Ottoman support, failed. By the end of the 17th century, Cossack autonomy was steadily reduced by both Poland and Moscow. In 1709, during the Great Northern War, Hetman Ivan Mazepa allied with Sweden in an attempt to break free from Moscow's control. After defeat at the Battle of Poltava, this effort collapsed. In exile, Cossack leaders adopted a constitutional document in 1710, often regarded as one of Europe's early constitutions. During the 18th century, the Russian Empire systematically eliminated Cossack self-rule. The office of hetman was abolished, the Zaporizhian Sich was destroyed in 1775, and the remaining Cossack institutions were dismantled. By 1783, serfdom was imposed on much of the Ukrainian population, marking the end of the Cossack era as a political force. Ukrainian national revival. After the final partition of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1795, Ukrainian lands were divided between two empires. The Habsburg monarchy received Galicia, Bukovina, and Transcarpathia, while the Russian Empire took control of the rest of Ukraine. From the late 18th century, influenced by European Romanticism and nationalism, a modern Ukrainian national movement began to emerge. A key symbolic starting point was 1798, when Ivan Kotlyarevsky published his burlesque poem Aeneida. Written in living, spoken Ukrainian, it became the first major literary work in the modern Ukrainian language and helped revive interest in Ukrainian culture, history, and Cossack traditions. Education played an important role in this revival. In 1806, Kharkiv University was founded and became an early center for Ukrainian studies. In 1834, Kyiv University was established, strengthening intellectual life in central Ukraine. Around this time, the historical work history of the Rus also influenced the development of Ukrainian historical thinking and identity. In the 1840s, the central figure of the national awakening became Taras Shevchenko. His poetry spoke about freedom, social injustice, and national dignity, and it spread widely among Ukrainians across different regions of the empire. Shevchenko's work turned cultural revival into a mass national movement. During the 19th century, many writers and thinkers contributed to Ukrainian culture, including Hryhorij Kvikosnovianenko, Mykola Kostomarov, Panteleimon Kulish, Ivan Franko, Lesia Ukrainka, and others. Together, they shaped modern Ukrainian literature and national thought. The revival, however, was viewed with hostility by the Russian imperial authorities. The government pursued a policy of cultural and linguistic assimilation, known as Russification. Ukrainian language publishing and education were restricted by official decrees, most notably the Valuev Circular and the EMS ukase, which severely limited the public use of Ukrainian. Despite these restrictions, the Ukrainian national movement continued to develop, laying the foundations for modern Ukrainian national identity. Ukrainian Revolution and the Ukrainian States, 1917 to 1922. In 1917, the February Revolution in the Russian Empire overthrew the monarchy and brought a provisional republican government to power. These events quickly affected Ukraine. On March 17, 1917, the Central Rada was formed in Kiev, led by historian Mikhailo Hrushevsky. After the Bolshevik takeover in Russia, the Central Rada proclaimed the Ukrainian People's Republic as an autonomous state on November 20, 1917. As fighting with the Bolsheviks began, full independence was declared on January 22, 1918. Soon after, the Ukrainian government signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany and Austria-Hungary, which helped drive Bolshevik forces out of Ukraine. At the same time, in Crimea, Crimean Tatars proclaimed the Crimean People's Republic on December 13, 1917, led by Noman Celebesyan. This state was short-lived and was occupied by the Bolsheviks in early 1918. On April 29, 1918, a coup in Kiev replaced the Central Rada with a conservative regime led by Pavlo Skoropadsky. The country was renamed the Ukrainian state. This government survived only until Germany's defeat in World War I. In December 1918, an uprising by the Directory of Ukraine, led by Simon Petlura and Volodymyr Vinichenko, overthrew the Hetmanate and restored the republic. With German troops gone, the Bolsheviks resumed their offensive. On January 6, 1919, they proclaimed the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in Kharkiv and launched a new war. During 1919 to 1920, Ukraine became the battlefield for many forces: Ukrainian Republicans, Bolsheviks, Russian nationalist armies supported by Britain and France, Polish forces, anarchists led by Nestor Makhno, and local partisan groups. By the end of this struggle, the Bolsheviks gained control over central, eastern, and southern Ukraine. Meanwhile, after the collapse of Austria-Hungary, Ukrainians in Galicia, Bukovina, and Transcarpathia proclaimed the West Ukrainian People's Republic on October 19, 1918, with its capital in Lviv. On November 1, Poland attacked, starting the Polish-Ukrainian War. The Western Ukrainian state lacked international support, while Poland was backed by the Entente powers. Seeking survival, the Western Ukrainian government united with the Ukrainian People's Republic on January 22, 1919. However, the Republic was already fighting the Bolsheviks and could not provide military help. By mid-1919, Poland occupied Galicia, Romania took Bukovina, and Czechoslovakia controlled Transcarpathia. In 1920, the struggle for Western Ukraine became part of the Polish-Soviet War. It ended with the Treaty of Riga, signed on March 18, 1921, which confirmed Polish control over Galicia and Volhynia. This period marked the dramatic but ultimately unsuccessful attempt to establish independent Ukrainian states amid revolution and global war. The Ukrainian SSR, Soviet rule, famine, and repression, 1920s, 1930s. On December 30, 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was created by Bolshevik-controlled republics, including the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Formally, all republics were equal. In practice, after the 1936 Soviet Constitution, power became highly centralized, and the republics lost real political autonomy. Ukrainization and its reversal. From 1923 to 1933, Soviet authorities promoted Ukrainization, expanding the use of the Ukrainian language in schools, science, media, the army, and party institutions. The goal was to reduce resistance to Soviet rule. However, by 1930, criticism of this policy intensified. In 1933, it was labeled nationalist deviation, mass repression began, and a new wave of Russification followed. These changes were driven by the Stalinist leadership and officials such as Lazar Kaganovich. Stalinist terror and culture. During the Great Terror of the 1930s, millions of Ukrainians were executed or sent to labor camps for political reasons. Thousands of writers, artists, and scholars were killed. The destruction of a whole generation of cultural figures from the 1920s, early 1930s is known as the executed Renaissance. Among the victims were leading theater directors, poets, writers, and visual artists, whose work had shaped modern Ukrainian culture. Economic transformation. At the same time, the Soviet regime enforced collectivization of agriculture and rapid industrialization. These policies broke traditional rural life and forced large numbers of people to move from villages to cities. The Holodomor. In 1932 to 1933, the Soviet government organized a man-made famine in Soviet Ukraine. It was aimed at enforcing collectivization and crushing resistance centered in the Ukrainian countryside. Ukrainian-populated regions outside Ukraine, such as the Kuban, were also affected. Estimates of Ukrainian deaths range from 4 to 12 million. The famine devastated rural society and destroyed long-standing social values. The Holodomor is internationally recognized as genocide and a crime against humanity. Western Ukraine and the nationalist movement. While most of Ukraine was under Soviet rule, Western Ukrainian lands in the 1920s, 1930s belonged mainly to Poland, Romania, and Czechoslovakia. There, the Ukrainian liberation movement continued. One major organization was the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, led by Kyivan Rus. This period left deep scars, political repression, cultural loss, and demographic catastrophe, alongside forced economic and social change. World War II in Ukraine, war, losses, the Holocaust, and deportations, 1939 to 1945. In August 1939, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany signed a non-aggression pact that secretly divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. On September 1, 1939, Germany attacked Poland from the west, and on September 17, the Soviet Union invaded from the east. As a result, Western Volhynia and Galicia, mostly populated by Ukrainians, were incorporated into Soviet Ukraine. In 1940, after Germany defeated France, the Soviet Union pressured Romania and took northern Bukovina and Bessarabia, adding them to Soviet Ukraine, while parts of Transnistria were transferred elsewhere. By mid-1941, Germany and the Soviet Union shared a direct border. On June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, invading the Soviet Union. Much of the fighting took place on Ukrainian territory. Germany was supported by several allies, including Italy, Hungary, Romania, and others. During the first months of the invasion, German forces captured most major Ukrainian cities. Kyiv fell in September 1941, followed by eastern regions in Crimea in 1942. The Soviet advance began after key turning points at Stalingrad in early 1943 and Kursk in summer 1943. Soviet troops retook Kyiv in November 1943 and regained full control of Ukraine by mid-1944. Germany surrendered in May 1945, ending the war in Europe and greatly increasing Soviet influence in Central and Eastern Europe. Ukrainians in the war. Most Ukrainians fought in the Red Army, while a smaller number served in German-aligned units. Others fought against both totalitarian regimes and underground movements that sought Ukrainian independence. In June 1941, leaders of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists proclaimed the restoration of a Ukrainian state in German-occupied Lviv. German authorities quickly arrested its leaders, including Stepan Bandera. Armed resistance groups later formed, most notably the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, which operated mainly from 1943 and continued after the war. The Holocaust in Ukraine. The German occupation brought mass violence against civilians. Ukraine became one of the main sites of the Holocaust. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were murdered in mass shootings, ghettos, and camps, including notorious killing sites such as Babyn Yar near Kyiv. Deportation of Crimean Tatars. In May 1944, after retaking Crimea, Soviet authorities carried out the deportation of Crimean Tatars. The entire Crimean Tatar population was forcibly removed to Central Asia. Many died during transport or in exile, and the community was banned from returning for decades. Human losses. World War II brought extreme destruction to Ukraine. Cities and villages were ruined, populations displaced, and entire communities wiped out. Total losses are estimated at 8 to 10 million people, making Ukraine one of the regions most devastated by the war. This period left a lasting impact on Ukraine's society, memory, and demographic structure. The struggle of the UPA against the Soviet Army, the 60ers, the Ukrainian dissident movement in the USSR, the human rights movement in the Ukrainian SSR, and the suppressed Renaissance. In 1945, the Ukrainian SSR became one of the founding members of the United Nations. The first Soviet computer, MESM, was built at the Kyiv Electrotechnical Institute and began operating in 1950. After the war, ethnic cleansing continued as the Soviet Union expanded. By January 1, 1953, Ukrainians were second on the list of adult special settlers, making up 20% of the total. In addition to Ukrainians, over 450,000 ethnic Germans from the Ukrainian SSR and more than 200,000 Crimean Tatars were victims of forced deportations. The Ukrainian SSR was heavily damaged during the war. Over 700 towns and 28,000 villages were destroyed, making reconstruction a massive challenge. The situation was worsened by the post-war famine of 1946 to 1947, caused by drought and wartime infrastructure destruction. This famine claimed tens of thousands of lives. After Stalin's death in 1953, Nikita Khrushchev became first secretary of the CPSU Central Committee. Having served as first secretary of the Communist Party of the Ukrainian SSR from 1938 to 1949, Khrushchev was deeply familiar with the republic. Once in power across the Soviet Union, he emphasized friendship between the Ukrainian and Russian peoples. In 1954, the 300th anniversary of the Pereyaslav Council was widely celebrated, and Crimea was transferred from the Russian SFSR to the Ukrainian SSR. By 1950, the republic had fully surpassed its pre-war level of industry and production. Between 1946 and 1950, nearly 20% of the Soviet budget was invested in Soviet Ukraine. As a result, the Ukrainian workforce grew by 33.2% from 1940 to 1955, while industrial output more than doubled during the same period. Soviet Ukraine soon became a European leader in industrial production, a key center of military industry, and a hub for high-tech research. This important role was supported and enhanced by the influence of the local elite. During the relative relaxation of Soviet repression in the late 1950s through the 1970s, known as the Khrushchev Thaw, a literary, artistic, and socio-political movement emerged among Ukraine's intelligentsia. This movement came to be known as the 60ers. The 60ers represented an internal moral opposition to the Soviet totalitarian state. Their worldview was based on freedom, humanism, and anthropocentrism. Among the most notable figures were writers Lena Kostenko, Hryhor Tyushenik, Vasyl Simonenko, Ivan Drach, and Vasyl Stus, literary critics Ivan Svetlikny and Ivan Juba, artists Alla Horska and Helena Sevruk, filmmakers Yuri Ilyenko and Ivan Mikolajczyk, and publicists Vyacheslav Kornevil and Valery Marchenko. As Soviet repression resumed, some 60ers partially compromised with the authorities, while others chose open opposition to the totalitarian regime. These individuals became part of the dissident movement, openly criticizing Soviet power and acting as its de facto opposition. A significant event in the Ukrainian SSR dissident movement was the founding of the Ukrainian Helsinki Group in 1976. Among its most well-known founders were Mykola Rudenko and Levko Lukyanenko. At the same time, a Crimean Tatar human rights movement existed, with the prominent dissident Mustafa Dzhemilev among its leaders. Dissidents faced political repression from the Soviet authorities, with many subjected to long-term imprisonment. Later, in 1991, the Act of Declaration of Independence of Ukraine was authored by dissidents Levko Lukyanenko, Vyacheslav Kornevil, and Mikhailo Horin. Restoration of Ukraine's state independence, 1990 to 1991. On July 16, 1990, the Verkhovna Rada of the Ukrainian SSR adopted the Declaration of State Sovereignty. This marked the start of a confrontation between the governments of the USSR and the Ukrainian SSR. On August 19, 1991, communist hardliners in Moscow attempted a coup to restore party control. The coup failed. On August 24, 1991, the Verkhovna Rada adopted the Act of Declaration of Independence of Ukraine. On December 1, 1991, a nationwide referendum confirmed this decision, with 90.32% of Ukrainians supporting independence. This marked the birth of an independent Ukraine. The same day, Ukraine held its first presidential elections. The winner was Leonid Kravchuk, the former chairman of the Verkhovna Rada and, from 1988 to 1990, head of the Communist Party's ideological department. On December 8, 1991, in Belovezhskaya Pushcha, and on December 21, in Almaty, the leaders of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia confirmed the dissolution of the USSR. They also established the Commonwealth of Independent States, or CIS. However, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine never ratified membership, so Ukraine was never formally a member of the CIS. Initially, Ukraine was seen as a republic with favorable economic conditions. However, the country experienced a deeper economic decline than some other former Soviet republics. From 1991 to 1999, Ukraine's GDP fell by 60%. The country also suffered from extreme inflation. Frustrated by economic hardship, crime, and corruption, Ukrainians held protests and strikes. In 1996, Ukraine adopted its constitution. This helped stabilize the political system but concentrated most powers in the hands of President Leonid Kuchma. In September of the same year, a monetary reform introduced a new currency, the hryvnia. By the late 1990s, Ukraine's economy stabilized. From 2000 onward, it began to grow again, averaging about 7% per year. The Orange Revolution. In 2004, the second round of Ukraine's presidential elections was marked by widespread systemic fraud. The manipulations favored the pro-government candidate, Viktor Yanukovych. This triggered nationwide protests, later known as the Orange Revolution. The Supreme Court of Ukraine annulled the Central Election Commission's results, declaring Yanukovych the winner. A rerun of the vote was held, and Viktor Yushchenko was elected president. Yanukovych returned to power in 2006 as prime minister during the anti-crisis coalition. This led to early parliamentary elections in September 2007. In 2010, Yanukovych was elected president. He formed a new government, headed by Mykola Azarov. On April 21, 2010, Yanukovych signed an agreement with Russian President Dmitry Medvedev to extend the Russian Black Sea Fleet's stay in Sevastopol until 2042. On October 11, 2011, the Pechersk court in Kyiv sentenced former Prime Minister and Yanukovych's main presidential rival, Yulia Tymoshenko, to 7 years in prison. Between 2010 and 2013, dissatisfaction with President Yanukovych's rule led to numerous protests. These included the Tax Maidan, Ukraine against Yanukovych, and protests in Vradiivka. On November 21, 2013, the Cabinet of Ministers refused to sign the EU Association Agreement. This agreement had been planned for the Eastern Partnership Summit. The refusal sparked massive protests by EU supporters. These demonstrations became known as Euromaidan and the Revolution of Dignity. Protesters opposed the violent suppression of civil rights. On the night of November 30, 2013, security forces attacked demonstrators, mostly students, in Kyiv. This prompted hundreds of thousands of people, some estimates say about 1 million, to take to the streets on December 1. They demanded the resignation of Prime Minister Azarov and President Yanukovych. The conflict reached its peak between February 18 and 20, 2014. More than 100 people were killed, around 1,500 were injured, and hundreds went missing. On February 22, the Verkhovna Rada removed Yanukovych from office and scheduled early presidential elections for May 25, 2014. Until a new president was elected, acting president duties were assigned to Oleksandr Turchinov, who had also been elected chairman of the Verkhovna Rada. Taking advantage of the political crisis, Russian intelligence instigated anti-state actions in Crimea starting February 23, 2014, and soon in eastern Ukraine. So-called self-defense units were quickly formed in Crimea. These units consisted of mercenaries brought from Russia. They seized government buildings and, together with Russian soldiers without insignia, began blocking Ukrainian military units. Clashes resulted in deaths of Ukrainian soldiers and pro-Ukrainian activists. Russia also blocked Ukrainian naval ships and land access to Crimea. On March 16, an illegitimate referendum was held, which Russia claimed legalized the annexation of Crimea. After Crimea was annexed, Russian authorities, led by Vladimir Putin, attempted to declare southeastern Ukraine as Russian territory. From April 2014, they tried to implement a similar scenario in Donetsk and Luhansk. Government buildings were seized in Donetsk and Luhansk, as well as in other cities like Kharkiv on April 7 and Odessa on April 22. On April 12, Russian forces captured Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Acting President Turchinov announced the start of an anti-terrorist operation, ATO. Pro-Russian militants declared the Donetsk People's Republic on April 6, and the Luhansk People's Republic on April 27. These entities were controlled and funded by Moscow, which provided weapons, fuel, and personnel. Between May and August 2014, the Ukrainian armed forces and volunteer battalions reclaimed significant territory and almost surrounded Donetsk. However, a sudden direct intervention by Russian forces near Ilovaisk allowed the Kremlin to secure the so-called DPR and LPR, freezing the conflict. On January 1, 2016, Ukraine joined the EU Free Trade Area. On June 11, 2017, Ukrainian citizens gained visa-free travel to the Schengen area for up to 90 days within any 180-day period. The association agreement with the EU officially came into force on September 1, 2017. The Arbitration Institute of the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce upheld Naftogaz claims for gas transit payments not delivered by Gazprom. Naftogaz received $4.63 billion in compensation. Following 2 arbitration proceedings, Gazprom paid $2.56 billion to Naftogaz. On November 25, 2018, the Kerch Strait incident occurred. Russian FSB Coast Guard fired upon and captured 3 Ukrainian Navy ships attempting to pass from the Black Sea to the Sea of Azov en route to Mariupol. In 2018, the process of granting autocephaly to the Kyiv metropolis began under Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew. The Tomos was granted on January 6, 2019, following the Unification Council that established the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. On February 21, 2019, constitutional amendments formally enshrined Ukraine's strategic course toward EU and NATO membership. These changes were included in the preamble, 3 articles, and transitional provisions of the Constitution. On March 2, 2020, Ukraine confirmed its first case of COVID-19 in Chernivtsi. On March 12, the government imposed a nationwide quarantine and declared a state of emergency. Borders, schools, some businesses, and public transport were closed. Mass gatherings were banned, and masks were required in public. The epidemic spread to all regions of Ukraine. Quarantine restrictions worsened the economic crisis. The number of officially unemployed increased by 67%. On March 20, the first patient recovered, although cases had already appeared in several regions. On February 23, 2021, Ukraine registered 2 COVID-19 vaccines, AstraZeneca and Pfizer/BioNTech. The first person was vaccinated the next day, on February 24. The quarantine was officially lifted on July 1, 2023, although it had effectively ended with the Russian invasion on February 24, 2022. At the NATO summit in Brussels in June 2021, leaders reiterated the 2008 Bucharest decision. It stated that Ukraine would become a NATO member with a membership action plan. Ukraine also retained the right to determine its own future and foreign policy without outside interference. On February 24, 2022, following a speech by Russian President Vladimir Putin, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. At 4 a.m. Kyiv time, Ukrainian territory was attacked with Kalibr and Iskander missiles. Russian forces advanced from Belarus, along the Russia-Ukraine border, and from temporarily occupied Crimea. On February 28, 2022, President Volodymyr Zelensky signed Ukraine's application for immediate EU membership. On the same day, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that Ukraine belongs in the EU, but accession would take time. On March 1, 2022, the European Parliament recommended making Ukraine an official EU candidate. On March 10, 2022, the EU Council requested an opinion from the European Commission. On April 8, 2022, von der Leyen personally handed the legislative questionnaire to Zelensky. On April 14, 2022, the Verkhovna Rada recognized Russia's actions during the invasion as genocide against the Ukrainian people. Russian atrocities occurred in cities such as Bucha, Borodianka, Hostomel, and Irpin. This genocide may be the largest in Europe since World War II. In Russian-occupied territories, Ukrainian language literature is being systematically destroyed. According to Human Rights Watch, Russian authorities are enforcing measures to eradicate the Ukrainian language in occupied areas. Ukrainian children deported to Russia are also subjected to Russification. On June 23, 2022, the European Parliament adopted a resolution urging immediate EU candidate status for Ukraine. On the same day, the European Council granted Ukraine official candidate status for EU membership. In this video, I talked about Ukraine. Subscribe to the channel. In the next video, you will learn about the indigenous peoples who lived in Ukraine in ancient times, and about Kyivan Rus, one of the most powerful states of its era. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next video.